So, welcome to talking about from going from an insight factory to a decision engine using AI. So today, basically, the whole concept is how do we leverage Gen AI or AI to help us as data leaders turn our teams into this big decision engine, this magical thing that we're all striving for. And so, to start off with, we're faster than ever before. As teams, we're building more things, we're leveraging technology more than ever. But yeah, our decisions still stall. We still see that a lot of the decisions that need to happen take weeks and weeks. And ultimately, we're using AI to accelerate our analysis, but not necessarily the direction that we want to go in. And so, when we have historically done data, this is how it works. We get a request that comes in, or someone that says, "Can you take a look at this?" We've often in the past started analysis. We tried to ask the why, but often didn't work. So we would jump into analysis, we deliver insights, and then we wait because the decision remains largely ambiguous. It's unclear owner, the takeaway, the use cases weren't clear, the timing around when we do it is not clear, and as a result, we ultimately feel like we aren't delivering value, or we're not delivering as much value as what we could. And so today, where I've seen a lot in the market is this is where AI gets added in, right in the middle. So requests will come in, same thing. We'll start the analysis, but we'll use AI to do the analysis, and we'll use AI to speed us up there. And that's great. But ultimately, as leaders, when we bring in AI after setting the direction, we're going to get lost. We're going to start delivering things that are not aligned to the decisions that are needed to be done. And ultimately, what that means is that we operate in two different ways. We operate in an insight factory fashion. So we'll deliver a ton of insights, a ton of information, a ton of detail or data, but no decision, no guidance on the decision, no guidance on where the business should go, no ultimately leading to a decision, which is what we should be trying to do. And so for me, the shift isn't actually a technical component. It's actually more about behaviors, our behavior as data leaders and data teams. And so how we show up ultimately leads to this space. How do we get to, where the conversation truly starts? How do we get clarity up front? How do we get true ownership about the decision, whether that's I own it, you own it, somebody else own it? And ultimately as well, what does good look like? I'm not talking about the analysis or the insights, but what would essentially be the ultimate outcome that would lead to a great decision? Right? I think that's the thing. We need to think in that way. And so for me, that's the decision framing. I don't want to start with the analysis. I actually want to start with the decision that needs to be made. Again, this is all truly obvious to all of us that have been in this space for a long time. But what I've started to do is actually to start using AI before we start anything else. And so we'll still get that ticket that comes in, we'll still get that request, we'll still have that question from our stakeholder. But I am starting to emphasize with my team, with my work, that AI is used earlier. It needs to be shifted to understand what the problem is and what the decision that we're trying to do. And so today, over the next handful of slides here, I'll show you a bunch of different examples that I use, some of the prompts that I use, and kind of where we can leverage AI to help us take that shift to that next level. And so, standard question that we get, can you look at why something happened? Conversion dropped, costs went up, our revenue, our basket size, whatever it happens to be. And I have three kind of different prompts that I've tried and that I still go back to over and over again. Firstly, I use AI to potentially be a decision clarifier for me. Like, what is the decision that needs to be made here? Like, you've given me, can we look at why conversion dropped? Okay, well, what are you trying to achieve? Who should own what in the decision? Like, when do we need to think about this? What is the difference between a decision and kind of an analysis task? And so I use AI to help me, especially when I give it a lot of context. You may have seen from prior talks how I leverage ChatGPT as a partner for me in building it and giving it context about the business and some of the underlying context files that I provide to it. But here, what I then do is say, okay, you understand the context of my team. Here's the problem that we're facing. This is the question we received. Let's try to decipher kind of some of the things that can be done. These things help me then go back to our stakeholders and have that conversation with them around this is the decision. Or, for example, when things get messy, so it's a second one, um, you know, the ticket is very vague. The language is vague. What is dropped mean? What is reduction? Is it a significant or not significant? Right. So on the second one is when things start to feel messy, I use AI to say, hey, help me review the information I've got in this ticket or this conversation I had, and help me clarify the language or the assumptions or the information. Right. So again, here it's more to help me when things are messy to drive it that way. And then finally, oftentimes we get into problems that are across multiple teams, multiple stakeholders. I've worked at a few large organizations in my past where there could be 5 to 10 people that are involved in this decision. And so, how do I get clarity on who the true decision owner is? Oftentimes it could be a silent partner at the table. Sometimes it's the most vocal one, but how do we get them? How do I ensure that I have the right people consulted or informed? Help me navigate this, right? How do I create that conversation with them to align on the true owner? Um, and again, really focus the AI on the decision ownership or the alignment, or how do I get alignment, right? And so these are kind of three things that I use. Again, we talked about, it's not about using AI to do your analysis better, but it's helping AI to shape the decision that needs to be driven so that you come across as more senior, authoritative, confident in the approach when you do come to do the analysis and share those findings. What about this one? Another case that we often get. I don't know if that happens to you, but it happens to me often is I'm invited to come and share insights. I'm invited to come and say, hey, what have you found recently on this topic or that topic? And so here, what I do there is, oftentimes we've done this in the past. I've shared these on prior lightning talks, the idea of storytelling, right? We've been taught in school to come, present our findings, show the work that we did and how we got to that, and then ultimately leave at the end with nothing else, right? Here's a bunch of things that I found and good luck. So with the use of AI, what I then do is say, okay, let's give AI the insight that we want to share, not a deck, not something, but the actual insight that we're looking to share. I ask AI to say, okay, how can you help me shift this narrative, this insight into a decision? And then I then come up to the conversation with, here's what we found, here's the options that exist for us, and here's the decision we need to make today, right? So we're not talking about, here's my insight, here's how I got to it. That stuff is to the side. That comes across as more junior. This is, here's what the insight is, here's what we need to decide on, and these are the options that we have, right? And so that way we're using AI to help me as a leader guide towards a choice and not just a lesson on developing or sharing insights. And so again, 3 prompts that you can leverage, and feel free, obviously, to screenshot, and the slides will be shared with you as well. But 1, help me become a partner with me, spar with me. A big word of the 2025 was sparring, and most companies that I talk to. Help me frame this decision the right way. Should we be there to inform? Should we be there to confirm? Should I be giving, decisions? Why should we be doing this now? Help me, be my executive sparring partner to help me understand how I can frame this decision. 2, once we kind of have some information about the decision that needs to be made, give me some options, some trade-offs. Give me 3 realistic options. Help me understand the trade-offs. Help me, call out what we're saying no to with each choice. Again, so the first one helps you understand the decision. The second one gives you the options and the trade-offs. So now you're coming in with some insights and some options. And the third one is about framing. And again, from prior lightning sessions, or even in the course that I run, we talk a lot about how do we frame a message to the audience that we talk to. How can I frame this for our CEO? My CEO is a certain style of individual that is different to my CFO. If I share the same message to both of them, especially around this decision, if I don't frame it in a way that they understand, then I won't get that decision. So oftentimes we see with marketing, they really care about that ROI on investment or the cost of acquisition or things like that. Maybe then your product person cares more about, the conversion rate to customers. They each have different metrics or different areas that they care about. So how do I then frame this decision in the language that they'll understand, with the points that matter to them, and understand where they might challenge and push back? So using prompt 1 into prompt 2 into prompt 3 lets me then take that insight that I was coming at and be fully prepared for that conversation around driving to a decision. So then I'm seen as not just another guy who provided numbers and random insights, but I'm now seen as the key person who leads decisions to happen based on data, right? We're a really important difference. So again, some prompts that really help frame that. Third scenario, let's just say you've been asked to get to a decision. So now they're finally explicitly you asking you to get to a decision, right? Here's how I then use AI for that. So we would often spend a lot of time perfecting slides. We would share pre-reads. We would walk into meetings where the conversation goes left, right, and center, right? Because even though we prepare a lot and we're clear about what we expect, people will still take it where they want to go, right? And so my goal here is to how do I use AI to help me become a strategic partner to the business, right? So how do I make sure that we have that clear framing? I shouldn't go into a meeting where we're still unclear about the options or the decisions. I shouldn't be going into a meeting where people are not already aligned. So for me, one of the big things that I do here in advance of any big decision is make sure that I already know what their decision will be before I go into the room, right? The room is for formalizing, it's the decision. The alignment happens before. And so what I do with AI is I ask it to help me prepare for maybe potentially different types of rooms. So if I'm in an executive meeting, I might say, hey, help me prepare for this meeting. Help me in advance define what this decision is, define what success looks like, highlight some of the trade-offs. What are some of those questions I might get in advance? And then I use this executive meeting preparation when I meet with people one-on-one so that I can understand from their perspective what all of this looks like and I can address it in that moment with them. Again, when I go to the big meeting, sometimes you might already know that when you're going into a conversation that they're not likely to be receptive. You've done your pre-work, you've met your alignment in advance. You might need still to push forward with that. Typically, if you've already done your alignment very well in this preparation and you've had these questions with your stakeholders and you've talked to them about this and you come prepared around the decision, the success, the trade-offs, the pushback, and phrases to stay focused, right? If you've used that with your individual stakeholders, then you shouldn't have a hostile room. But in some cases, you know you're making a decision that isn't going to be well received. Okay, great. I also use AI here, specifically to help me. If I can make myself feel more uncomfortable and have this massive debate with AI in advance of the meeting, then I'm probably going to go into this meeting much more prepared, right? It's the same as if I'm training for a marathon. I'm going to practice and maybe make myself more uncomfortable before the marathon. I don't run marathons, so if I'm wrong with that, but any uncomfortable situation, I make myself more uncomfortable, the situation becomes easier to handle. So here, what are some of those emotional resistance? How do I tackle something that is an ego or emotional versus an actual risk? How do I what are some of the strongest objections I'm going to face? How can I appear calm and collected? Because a lot of the times, again, with decisions and data, how we come across is more important than the actual message that we share, right? And so if I'm able to respond to things with confidence, oftentimes they will then believe it and move forward. If I say, I don't know, I'm unsure, let me get back to you. Now, that creates a little bit of uncertainty, and then the decision gets pushed down the line. There are many reasons to say I don't know or I'm not sure, but in some of these cases, that's what we're trying to avoid, right? So here again, a couple prompts that are often in there, and the biggest one for me is with AI, very important. I make sure I don't want to soften the decision. I don't want to have to relitigate the analysis. So I'm very clear about it saying, look, let's not go down that path. How do we stay fact driven? How can I appear as an executive with my peers when I have these conversations? Excuse me for a second. Okay. I'm going fast, but obviously, if you have any questions, please jump in at any time. If not, we'll leave some time at the end. There are many times that we want to say no to something. So I framed it differently, but say you've been asked for something you shouldn't say yes to, right? So we often say yes to many things as data leaders because we are a service provider, or we don't want to avoid conflict, or we don't want to appear difficult, or we don't want to be a bottleneck. Or if we do say no, it's often because of capacity or constraints, and the business rolls their eyes at us as we go down that path. We will always have more requests than we can handle, but the more that we say no, or we don't deliver, the less the business is willing to engage and the less we're seen as that strategic partner at the table that we want to be. And so again, I use AI a couple of different ways that will go on the next slide. But for me, the big things is I'm really big on trying to clarify what this decision or this analysis or this request is going to lead us to drive. Like, how are we supporting the business in this? What is this tied to an OKR? Is it tied to an initiative? How can I ultimately know that we're going to provide value, right? And if we're trading off against something, then I make it clear that we can do anything. We can do A, B, C, D. However, there are consequences to those things. And here's why, right? Obviously, capacity is always one, constraints always one, but we're not just using that as an excuse to say no. We're saying I can do A, but I'm going to have to push B back by 2 weeks, or C will have to get scrapped until we get additional capacity in X, right? And then by framing it that way, we're framing our no's as prioritization choices or choices of decision with consequences instead of just, no, we can't do that. No, I'm busy. No, the team's swamped. It's not a rejection. We're framing it as a decision on their part. And so I use AI to help me with this also, right? Again, when you go into these confrontational, and using quotes, but in theory, we often feel that they are confrontational. I want to make sure that I'm prepared in advance. So again, I use AI to be my partner, my communication partner, my stress testing partner. So in this case here, two scenarios. I want to preserve trust. Ultimately, every no, I need to make sure that I'm not just seen as the no guy, but I'm seen as someone who's thinking strategically about the resources and funding and value creation that I provide. And if you frame it that way, then everybody's doing the same thing. Everyone has limited resources, whether it's cost, quality, time. We all know the triangle. I'm just thinking about that when I say no to you. And so how do I keep that trust, right? I help AI to help me, especially with the requests, to identify what we're trying to do. Why would saying yes? How do I reframe it? How do I suggest something that's clear? Give me maybe an alternative path. And then because I've fed AI a lot of information about the stakeholders that I respond, I talk about that as know your audience and this template that I provide in my course around kind of developing this 360 view of your stakeholders who understand who they are, what matters to them, how they like to be communicated with. So based on that information, it helps me then frame this no in a way that they're going to say, that makes sense. I support that. I understand that. Or, hey, I disagree with you and here's why. And then we can have a conversation instead of them shutting down and moving on. Right. So again, it's all about building that trust. The clarify before you say no is another option for us to think about, what am I trying to do here? Everyone has influence or purpose. Everyone has some sort of thing that they're trying to accomplish in the company. And sometimes those are conflicting, right? I might be trying to grow my customer base, but my engineering team is trying to reduce their tech debt. Well, both of those they might be similar and maybe in the same direction, but oftentimes they're not. And so how do I still frame this so that they understand that clarity? Maybe I want to have a bit more understanding as to why I'm saying no. What am I missing from my requirements? What would they think I need to do? And so again, framing it in a slightly different way. But ultimately, as we know, every time we say yes to one thing, we are saying no to 5 other things. So saying no is just explicitly saying it, but by agreeing to it, you're saying no to 5 other things indirectly. And so again, using AI as a partner, right? Big sparring partner. It's quite lonely as a data leader, and the ones like you are. There's not many other people in the company who understand what we do. There's not a clear trade-off for them to understand the value between tech debt and building new things and saying no or not now. And so again, I want to have a partner that I can bounce ideas off of. This is what I use to do that. And so eventually, so far we've managed to use AI for, before we do some analysis, we talked about that. We've talked a few scenarios here about meetings and saying yes and no, right? I've given you 3 areas where you would use it before the analysis to get what's the decision, before meetings to help guide where we want to go, and before saying yes or no, or ultimately no. How do I use that to spar with it and to become that strategic partner for me? But ultimately, too, now there are tools that allow us to kind of automate this. We've heard of these as agentic AI, but oftentimes we've got these prompts. and that we kind of reuse over and over and over again. Some of the stuff now I've put into ChatGPT where I now have a trigger word where it knows that if I use the trigger word, it knows that we're going to do this yes or no. So for example, um, I would just say for meetings, it's meeting clarity, and then it knows, okay, which of these three things would you like to do? It's already trained on those prompts. So I don't have to repeat the prompts over and over again. And we enhance those. And so some of those are prompts that I just put in a file that I upload into my folder. And from there, it has the prompts in there. So it goes and searches those prompts. If I want to improve on those prompts or make them better, I improve in the file and it remembers. So I don't have to go and copy and paste all the time or search for it. But there's also this idea of using agentic. And I'll be very transparent with you. I'm only dabbling in this right now. I was trying to get this in as an example in time, but I couldn't get it to work the way that I wanted to again today. But I'm now starting to use tools like N8N to kind of create this repeatable step. And as soon as there's an input, to continue to iterate on it. So I'm using it right now from a JIRA intake process where it connects to our warehouse and documentation, DBT docs, to understand what's available in the warehouse. So it will then based on the input of the JIRA ticket, will then give me it will ask some questions that we can then get more information on and then propose kind of a solution. So it's been helpful for that. I would say we're probably about 70% of the way there, and I'm looking to implement that in the company by the end of Q1, for example, as a way for us to use that internally within our team. And so here, for example, Agentic AI, they're not magic. They do require a lot of setup, especially around the context file and feeding it a bunch of the information in terms of what exactly you want it to do while keeping it kind of focused. But some of the use cases I've been playing around with is, can it trigger something? Can it trigger when an event happens or something happens? Can it trigger automatically an email or a Slack? The playbooks is what kind of I was talking about in terms of when you get this request in and it's marked high priority, can you automatically go back and ask these questions to the stakeholder again via the trigger? Or maybe it's for us, it's Slack that we're playing around with. Or even back on the JIRA ticket itself, you can ask further clarifying questions so that you don't need to use a human for this. So you get them more information. And then from that, then obviously you're driving towards that decision, right? So how do I reduce my headcount to get the information that I want to drive to that decision? And then obviously then these tools kind of fit into different tools. So we were able then to feed that all back into creating a new ticket or adding stories or tasks to the tickets in JIRA, which is kind of what we've been doing there. And then obviously then you can then implement your own guardrails, human checks, approvals, pull requests, and things like that. And so there's a couple of examples that I think are kind of really cool right now. Um, you know, I don't know why this one is here, but this is the example that I wanted to give, which is the decision. So this is the one we're looking at right now. So we're getting these requests that come in. It then will pull out what is the decision that's happening. If it's not clear, it'll ask questions about that. It'll ask questions about who's accountable, what the decision that we're trying to make is. It'll try to separate that out from the analysis as well. So again, I say, okay, you have 3 questions max that you can ask back to get this information. If it's not there, like what is it? And so we've been tweaking on that and ultimately give a bit more like what's missing from the context. So then it writes a better, more detailed ticket as an intake agent. And I was hoping to get an example here, but I couldn't get it to work, like I mentioned. Work in progress, always fun. The second one is that I've seen on N8N, and we're starting to look at that as well, as this idea of, I don't know why it's the same slide. Oh, okay. This idea around how can it help frame the decision? How can we get more clarity around the actual decision that needs to happen? The next one is sort of similar to the first example. The second example that I kind of wanted to go through a little bit more is around same that we talked about. So automatically, you can now connect it to a file. So you can obviously upload a pre-read or an agenda from a meeting and then say, okay, what are we trying to do here? And then what are some of the things that matter? So a lot of this information you can use in Agentic through your calendar or even Gmail briefings that are now included depending on which you use. We use Outlook, for example. So for us, we've connected or trying to connect Outlook into the decision and then try to figure out what is the purpose of this meeting and how can I provide the value in that space. So The next one that I'll go into here is the self-service via decision-aware intake. So again, this is one where now as people submit JIRA tickets or they're trying to find information or requests, that we're thinking about how do we then connect that to our repository of information that we have. So we can connect it to our warehouse, we can connect it to our DBT docs, we can connect it to any existing dashboard that is documented, for example, through YAML files. And it will, so when the stakeholder submits a request, the agentic AI will then go and search all of the documentation and information and propose a solution. Again, there's a risk there that it proposes an incorrect solution, but if you keep it to a constrained, curated environment, for example, for us, we're keeping it to our semantic layer, which we know has the information or is very well documented and traceable, then it keeps it fairly quick. This has been helpful, or at least the concept of what we're testing out as a POC has been helpful with this idea around metric definitions, or if people are asking for clarity, or if there's something incorrect about the dashboard, it can check the logs and things like that, or if it's looking for documentation. So we've been able to test out very loosely, but get some of these things back. So we're looking at, using the agent to kind of get more clarity on the question, but also just cross-reference and provide a solution, right? Or drive someone towards the self-service offering that exists. So that might reduce 20%, for example, of the questions that we get in, but over time, as you can imagine, there's always these more pressing things that pop up. So how do we spend more time on those? And so for me, the biggest message that I can share today is, right now, most teams are using AI to just do their jobs faster, or to generate slides, or to kind of think about how we do work better. But actually, I think as data leaders, we need to be using it as how do we provide more clarity up front so that we get rid of the scope creep, the enhanced, the unclear direction or decisions, the lack of clarity around trade-offs, or not understanding the resistance to the decisions that need to be made, right? We spend a lot of our time generating fantastic insights that never leads to anything. And so how can we then leverage AI for ourselves to get ahead of these things so that we can frame it in a way that the business understands, the business sees value, the business wants to act, and ultimately we are now then becoming partners for them and not just another faster at doing what we were doing before. Because I believe that what we were doing before is fantastic already. AI is helping us be faster, great. But ultimately, what we were lacking was stakeholder alignment, communication, decisions making, and ultimately just the business side of driving data, right? So how do we make sure that we remain seen that way as a partner? And so for me, I guess the takeaway is if AI isn't helping you change how you're getting to decisions, then you're not using it strategically enough. Claude Code is great for your team, but there's AI value in you getting a better decision. And so all that to say today, appreciate you all coming. Obviously, part of the course that I run is from data manager to AI ready leader. We speak a lot about the behind the scenes, how we can generate what I call an operating system for getting people to act on the insights. How can you drive influence? How can you build credibility around AI and business cases and driving value and impact in your company? How do you take your team from being a ticket shop into a partner? One of a lot of the things we talked about today is a small piece of that course. And our next cohort starts on January 26th, so 2 weeks from now. And for joining us today, as a thank you for coming, here's a QR code. You'll get 20% off the course. My advice is invest yourself in 2026. I think we're going to see massive leaps both in our ability to deliver value to the business, but also significant increase in pressure this year to drive value as a data team. We've been spending more and more money on data. We've been spending more and more money now on AI. And the business is going to start to ask soon, what are you doing? What value are you providing? How are you helping us be better? And most organizations that I've seen and the customers or clients that I work with, their organizations are not yet mature enough to truly understand the underlying value that data delivers by helping make better decisions. And so part of it this year is how do you invest in yourself to get that skills and that framework to drive that value within the business. So hope today was useful, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I'll pause the recording now, and if there's any questions, I'm free to answer them as we go along. Let me just